This is Big T. Welcome to another video from me. I'm kind of looking at some of these videos that's popping up on my feed a lot now. It says switch to Linux. A little history. I've used Linux off and on since probably about 1999. It's a good operating system, although the nerds out there are probably already cramming their fingers on their keyboard saying Linux is not an operating system. I know. With all these different install videos, why should anybody watch mine? You're not a programming expert. You're not even a computer repair technician. Well, you'd be right. I'm more of a hobbyist than anything, and well, just to be honest with you, I'm a downright tightwad, and I don't like spending money where I don't have to. So if you keep hearing about Linux, but you don't know what it really is, the way to think of it is a computer operating system. Everybody's going to jump on there and tell me I'm wrong, but it really is. In modern parlance, modern terminology, it's an operating system. It's more than what it actually is. It's just like Windows or Mac OS. And you're probably thinking, well, if it's like that, why isn't it installed on anything? Well, it's been a long time coming, but for computer programmers, Dell had started putting Ubuntu or Red Hat Enterprise Linux on their high-end lines of computers if you choose to purchase those. And you have to seek it out. You have to look for it on their Dell website. If you know you need it, then you know you need it, and you're going to find it anyway. But what about the average person? Some retailers are starting to come around. Walmart, even for a while there in the I want to say mid 2000s, they kind of got their hands on a few Linux computers, and I think Microsoft flipped out on them so bad they quickly, as soon as those things sold out, they killed the system. Now, why are these Linux videos popping up now though? Well, there's two primary reasons. Windows has gotten so bloated with slop that the company that Bill Gates started is now called Microslop. It's a bad joke. People in Microsoft, the company, probably hate it, but the general public is calling it Microslop. It's useless. Garbage such as ads. You buy a computer and Microsoft wants to cram ads for you to purchase from their partners, so you get ads in the operating system, which is a place where ads need never be. You've got AI that nobody's asked for. Is it a good and functional tool? Yes, it is. You're not going to hear me bash AI from the standpoint of AI bad, but the fact that they're putting it on the personal computer and demanding that you use it is kind of nonsensical. When I'm typing or writing my ideas, I don't want AI telling me that I've done it wrong. I just want to express my ideas. And if I ask for AI to interfere with it and rewrite my own thoughts, I'll specifically ask for it. And I've not asked for it yet, so I don't see any reason why I have to have keys that tell me to use AI. I don't need ads to tell me to use AI. I wish I could tell Microsoft, leave me alone. Let me just use my computer the way I want to, and you keep your nose out of it. Finally, there's privacy and spying issues. Microsoft wants to track everything you're doing, and they'll tell you they're not reading your private information, but they are. They have a fancy word for it now. Instead of calling it spying, they call it telemetry. And with Windows 11, you're not supposed to be able to get around that telemetry. By God, you're going to share with Microsoft whether you want to or not. Now, secondly, Windows is trying to cancel its own operating system, which is Windows 10, and force everyone to upgrade to Windows 11. It's kind of self-serving. If you throw away your old computer and you buy a new computer with Windows on it, Windows gets whatever their fee is for putting Windows on systems that you purchase. So that's self-serving. They want to force you to buy a new computer. They don't want you to just simply upgrade your system. And the problem is that you cannot upgrade your computer easily. Well, you can, but I want to stress that word easily, unless you have a special chip in it. It's called the Trusted Platform Module. That sounds fancy, but all it is just a piece of hardware that's mounted to the motherboard that tries to keep your secrets between only yourself and Microsoft and their partners and the Chinese government. Because let's face it, anything Microsoft does is going to be shared with every worldwide government where they want to do business with. So, sure, that Trusted Platform Module is probably more useless than, well, the phrase about boar hogs come to mind. But I can't stress enough that your computer is more than likely just fine. There's no sense in dumping it in a landfill just because Microsoft tells you to. Let's go back in time to Windows 95. You say, well, Windows 95 is dead. Yeah, but they never really canceled it. If you had a Windows 95 computer and you wanted to use it today and it still had Windows 95 on it, it'd still function. You may not want to be on the web with it. You may not want to try downloading videos with it, but you could fire it up and do your word processing. You could do your spreadsheets. Anything that you could do with a Windows 95 system back then, you could still do today if your computer hadn't burned up or died. But Windows, 3 years after Windows 95, put out Windows 98, and they promised everyday consumers that your experience would be better. And in some cases it was, in some cases it wasn't. But you know, if you had a good computer and you were satisfied with your computer, you could simply buy the upgrade to Windows 98 and still use your computer. The internet at that time was just getting started. Can't stress that enough. It wasn't what it is today. Dial-up was painfully slow, but retailers had a line that they used on people all the time. If you buy this new system, you'll get online faster, or your downloads will get faster. In truth, on a dial-up system, nothing was going to make anything faster. You were not limited because your computer couldn't handle it. You were limited because it couldn't get through the phone line fast enough. The majority of the public had dial-up internet at that time, and there was no real gauge to see if your system was really faster or not. And this is where the creation of the MP3 and CD ripping comes into play. This is really important. This is what spurred more upgrades on computers for the home use than anything. And if a computer with a Pentium processor could rip your CD and get all the songs off of it and put it on a hard drive in 30 minutes, the Pentium 2 version of that same computer could rip the CD in 20 minutes. Or if you even had the money at the time to go up to a Pentium 3 and you could rip that same CD in 10 minutes, each step was something that you as an individual user could measure. Back then, everybody had a CD or two that they wanted to rip onto their computer and carry it around with them, or whatever the case may be. And you could see the change. That was something you could measure. Now, when talking about music files, nobody ever brings up moving record collections to computers, and there's a reason. No matter what you do with a record, it can only feed the information into your computer audio jack at the speed with which the song plays. So converting a record collection to MP3 was irrelevant. It didn't matter. Now, the promise of a faster system and better downloads was that huge selling point, and that really spurred people to upgrade extremely as fast as they could have the funds available to do it. But that particular selling point died with cable internet, or DSL. Widespread adoption of high-speed internet caused probably the first real computer crash of the early 2000s. As more and more homes got online and they bought a new computer, and their computer couldn't rip the CD any faster because it just didn't matter. The CD could only spin at one rate of speed, and that speed hadn't changed that much. And there was no promise that you'd get a faster download if you went from one system with a Pentium 2 or a Pentium 3 to a Pentium 4. That speed never materialized because DSL and cable internet was just so supremely fast that you couldn't really tell a measurable difference, so people quit buying computers to upgrade because it didn't matter. Now, at that time, if you were wanting a real upgrade, a real hardcore upgrade from an older system to a newer system, the low end was $1,000, and the upwards, the expensive side, started getting into $2,500. And it's true. That's just as true today. I'll probably talk about that in a minute, about the fact that Best Buy, you can get sub $500 systems, but what are you really getting for your money? Now, back in that same time, when a computer was $1,000 to $2,500 for a total system upgrade, an operating system upgrade was only $100. You didn't have to buy a new operating system if you already had a Windows system. You just bought the disk for the next upgrade and you'd be fine. The average home user did not know that there were actually other operating systems at the time. For most business users, most businesses had Windows NT. And Windows NT was supposed to be superior to Windows 95 and 98 because it crashed less often. It didn't mean it didn't crash at all. It just meant it didn't crash as much as the home user's version of Windows. And Windows went from Windows NT to Windows 2000 for business users. And after Windows 2000, they changed it to something called Windows XP. With Windows XP, everything merged into one operating system, and they had a home version and a pro version. But everything was essentially Windows NT from that point on. Linux was just really getting going about the time Windows 98 was out, but it was primarily for hobbyists and hardcore developers. It was designed to mimic Unix systems. Anybody that worked in a bank or an institution that required heavy computing power had OS2 or some other variant of Unix. And this was what Linux started out as. It was just the guts of what the Unix system was. When he designed it, this guy named Linus Torvalds, where the Lin for Linux comes from, Linus just designed the kernel, and trying to talk about Linux and talking about it was never an operating system is a lot like hot tubs and jacuzzis. All jacuzzis are hot tubs, but not all hot tubs are jacuzzis. It's all about branding. When you say jacuzzi, everybody just automatically thinks of hot tub, and it's become the generic term for hot tub. Linux is the kernel, or the guts of the system. The kernel is that layer of code that sits between your actual computer and the software that you, the individual, use to interact with your computer. And Linux, over time, has just come to mean distro. Now, in the Windows world, you're going to hear words like driver and software. Linux and Mac OS use that same terminology, and Linux adds another word to the computer mix. It's called distro. Now, Linux without the rest of the software is pretty much useless to anyone other than just hobbyists and computer scientists who are investigating it and just tinkering with it. This is where other hobbyists come into play. The other hobbyists take the kernel and they add extra software to it to build out a complete distribution. Some of the fledgling companies that put together the rest of the software to go with the kernel still exist today. There were several versions that even went mainstream. There was Debian, Slackware, Red Hat in the US, SUSE in Germany, and Mandrake in France. All these companies contributed a little something different, but they were all kind of going into the same pot. And there were differences between them, and some of these differences are kind of interesting, and that's what makes trying them out unique. Mandrake evolved into Mandriva. As far as I know, it's still in development today. SUSE is now OpenSUSE. Red Hat changed its name. Now it's called RHEL, or Red Hat Enterprise Linux. This version is really expensive to get your hands on, but there are a couple of, let me rephrase that. This version is expensive to get your hands on, but there are a couple of free systems that are directly tied to Red Hat, where you, the public, are the perpetual beta testers for what's new. And those are CentOS and Fedora. Now, there is a free version of RHEL, or Red Hat Enterprise Linux, called Rocky Linux. And he's not tied to Red Hat. He just uses the code as the license permits, but he has to strip all the Red Hat name branding out of it. But it's essentially line for line, part of the code, the same thing. Slackware is still out there today, but in truth, I've never tried it, so I can't speak on it. Which brings me to the two distributions that we're going to be installing in this video, Debian and Linux Mint. Debian is the starting point for so many distributions. It is only released as a point distribution release when it is absolutely rock solid and not prone to crashing. It is developed at a much slower pace than any other distribution that I can think of out there. The original developers built hardware and software stacks for corporations out in California when they was getting their start, and one of the first people on their board of directors was an animator, or he may not have been on the board of directors, but he was a part of it. He was an animator at Pixar, and Pixar was one of the first major corporations to use Debian. And that goes back to one of the reasons why Debian started using the names of the characters from Toy Story as their distribution release names. Now, I've not mentioned Ubuntu. It was not one of the originals. It's probably definitely considered mainstream. It's one of the more well-known ones out there. If you hear the word Ubuntu and you're in the computing world, you kind of know it's a Linux system. It was built on Debian, and it's important to the story because it was one of the distributions that took an extremely difficult installation system, Debian, and made it a better installation. Now, Ubuntu's big money comes from their corporate servers, not their desktop systems. They've tried to build a desktop system, and they have to keep going back to their server business because, let's face it, that's what keeps the lights on. Doing a desktop is kind of programming intensive, and you have to have some people in the arts and croissants field because you need people to make it look attractive. Now, I'm gonna stop right there and I'm gonna get into some real nerd speak. I know that this was gonna come up in this discussion, but I'm gonna talk about open source. When it comes to the Linux kernel, anyone that wants to look at the code can look at it. It's freely available for anybody to look at. Corporate leaders, governments, terrorists, anybody can look at it. Nobody is limited. Anyone that wants to alter the code on their own computer can download that code, alter it, recompile it, and fix it however they so choose if they want to do that. That's all open source means. Microsoft Windows and Mac OS, those two systems are not open source. Both of those systems are super duper trade secrets, and they don't want anyone else to know how to do what they do. Now, Linux and most of the programs within an individual distribution are almost all open source, meaning you can look at it, you can alter it. The average person is probably never going to alter the code. But the fact that so many people can look at it and alter it and submit those changes to the public forums where those software programs are hosted, that's kind of a give and take that people can do with it. Now, whether you do it or not, it's entirely up to you. Now, this all sounds like a great idea, so if this was so superior of an idea, why didn't it take off when Windows 95, Windows 98, Windows ME were the nightmares that they were to work with? Everybody's going to lie to you, and I'll tell you the real answer. It comes down to two items. It comes down to modems, and it comes down to sound cards. If you were online back then and a thunderstorm rolled through and zapped the phone line somewhere 1 mile away, 20 miles away, it doesn't matter, send a supercharge through your computer, it usually fried your modem. And most mid-sized towns had a Walmart with a computer section. And in that computer section, there was an entire wall dedicated to modems. And most of the modems ranged from $12 to $20. They did have a few that were $100 and more expensive, but the average Joe walking into a Walmart wanting to get back online from having an outage is going for that $20 or $8 or $12. He's going for that budget modem. And none of those modems worked on Linux. They were software modems. They required a driver for the computer to actually run. And because the code was not open to anyone, no one could program a driver for it. And I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft paid these companies to not write a driver for Linux. The modems that could work with Linux were what's called a hardware modem. And those were between $100 and $200 a piece. And if you were living in, let's say, the rural South, where summer thunderstorms happen often, you didn't want to buy too many of those. So you weren't trying to change your system based on your modem. You wanted to keep the cheapest thing possible, and that was the software modem. The other part of the problem was the sound card. The sound card, back in the early days of computing, was the sound blaster. Realtek hadn't come along yet that I'm aware of. If they were, I don't remember hearing the Realtek name until, well, Sound Blaster screwed the pooch. When they released their X5 series of cards, they gave a middle finger to the development community, told Linux to screw you, and they did not create a proprietary driver for Linux, nor did they release any information so that the advanced Linux sound architecture community could build something, even if it was a generic one without all the bells and whistles that they had. I was one of those people that wasted money on one of those X5 series of cards, and with most computer hardware at the time, once you took it out of the box and installed it in your system, you couldn't get a refund. Well, I'm one of those people that never bought another Sound Blaster product ever again after that debacle. Now, Linux faced a few more hurdles, but the modem and getting online was the #1 problem. Driver support for sound was another problem. Linux faced a few other hurdles though regarding widespread adoption. One was something called the MP3 file. The other one was the DVD file. The MP3 began before Napster or iTunes ever existed. Everybody wants to say iTunes made the MP3 popular. It did not. Napster probably did more to move people to using MP3s than anything else. If you had a CD collection and it took you 10 minutes per CD to rip your CD, and you had 100 of those to go, you see how the time builds up. You've had several computer crashes where you had to wipe Windows clean, and people had to re-rip their CD collection. Well, if they could go to Napster and they could get those MP3s in a matter of hours instead of a matter of weeks, that made Napster really dang popular for people restoring their music collection after a Windows crash. But the whole thing about MP3 was these audio files, when you ripped your CD to a hard drive, technically you didn't have to convert it to MP3. You could leave it as a raw audio file, WAV file, and that file might be 50 to 70 megabytes. That was huge. But these sound engineers or software engineers found a way to remove all the various zeros that were in a file, and they could reinsert them after they play. I really don't understand 100% of the algorithm. I'm not going to try to teach you. Original file 50 megabytes, new file 5 megabytes. It was a significant decrease. And this was at a time when an 80 gigabyte hard drive was this ridiculously expensive fantasy. On a dial-up modem, for instance, if you was trying to download one of those 50 megabyte song files, it might take you all day. And that's provided nobody called your phone at home and knocked you offline during the middle of the download. So downloading songs that were full-sized was not feasible. On a dial-up, a 5 megabyte song could be downloaded in an hour or two, with luck. And of course, DSL and cable internet, you could have that exact same song in about a minute. So that MP3 file was a big part of the combination of why Linux didn't just become popular. The MP3 codec, when those guys created the MP3 format, it started out as free, but then the guys who invented it saw how popular it was becoming and they wanted their cut, and they got it. Linux, on the other hand, did not have a cut to give because these companies were giving away their distribution for free. they didn't want to be sued over something that they were giving away for free, so they cut out the MP3 support altogether from the company level. Now you could go find it on the web and go through the headache of installing it, but for their part, they weren't doing it. The companies didn't want to have a dog in that fight. Now, if your sound card had a problem, your MP3 had a problem, and you couldn't listen to your jams, why have Linux? It was useless. Then the DVD and Blu-ray issue was the next major hurdle for the Linux systems. Video discs, whether DVD or Blu-ray, they have underlying code that requires a license to play. Now, when you bought your Blu-ray player or your DVD player for your set-top box for your TV, you already paid for the license. It was in the hardware. You couldn't purchase the hardware without it. So it was part of it. And for some reason, that same line of logic did not apply to buying a Blu-ray or DVD drive that fits in your computer. For some reason, it would work on Windows, but it was outlawed on Linux. So Windows paid for the licensure, Mac OS paid for the licensure. Both of those systems could play it. And then some 10-year-old in Europe cracked that licensure for free. But again, the corporations that were giving away Linux for free didn't want involved in that, so they would not include that in their distribution. They had to literally cut it out of the code because, again, they don't want sued. Now, today, the software modems, they're a thing of the past. Sound Blaster died at the hands of Realtek, the maker of just about every sound chip that goes onto a motherboard today. The patent on MP3s is expired. Now every distribution can include that code to play them. Now DVDs and Blu-rays are still in a technical limbo, yet there's a software on Linux, well, it's for Windows, Mac, or Linux. It's called Video LAN Client, or VLC. It can play these files just fine, but on most systems, that's one piece of software that you have to download after the fact rather than having it included. Now I feel like I'm missing a piece of this adoption puzzle, and yes, I've scripted this out, so I am reading it, but I got down to this point and I was like, well, I'm missing something. I'm missing the fact that I haven't talked about graphics cards. Graphics cards and gaming kind of go hand in hand. John Dvorak was an opinion writer and programmer. He wrote a piece on Linux adoption. It was either in the late 90s or early 2000s. And he said that Linux adoption will never go mainstream because of games. He was right. That opinion came out and people were mad about him stating it outright, but he was correct. It's as true today as it was back then. Today, Steam has a Linux program that you can use with Linux distributions, and they even have their own Linux version. Gaming is finally catching up, but you still have the question of the video cards. Now, I'm not a purist about open source. My feelings are I paid for that card and I want that card to work no matter what operating system I'm using, whether it's Mac, Windows, or Linux. I paid for the card. Now, AMD and NVIDIA provide the drivers for free to download, but each distribution has its own quirks, and NVIDIA and AMD are not going to sit there and go distribution by distribution and try to hunt down all the quirks. They're not doing it, and the distros, excuse me, the distros aren't going to put AMD and NVIDIA drivers into their systems because they all come back to this purist standpoint. I'm not redistributing anything that's not open source. And that's freely available, it's free to use, but it's not open source, therefore they get their panties in a bunch and won't make it work. And this is kind of where we have to talk about Linux Mint. Some French feller, I think his name was Clement Lefebvre, he got tired of the headache of trying to get mainstream graphics cards to install with a Linux. So he took the Ubuntu system and he made the installer actually install that vile, proprietary, dirty NVIDIA driver or AMD driver for you. This one hurdle helped so many people get into Linux. But he didn't stop there. He included not the code, because he didn't want to get sued either, but he included a line in the installation code that would seek out on the web that special MP3 support, DVD support, Blu-ray support, as well as those graphics drivers. And he was the first to really make media file playing and graphics easy to install. But he didn't just stop there. He kept going. He made the working environment look and function extremely similar to Windows and Mac. It was never completely one-to-one, but it was awfully good. When Ubuntu made its own desktop, he cleaned his up and made it look even better. When GNOME Desktop went with a new look, with a new underlying programming code stack underneath it, that Clement Lefebvre guy, he kind of stuck with what he had, what he knew, and he maintained it himself and called it Cinnamon. That's where his desktop system comes from. Now, when Ubuntu crammed in a new packaging system called Snap, Linux Mint took that garbage out. So with these two installs, I want to show you difficult but doable and downright easy. But why would I want to go through all this with an old system? There's nothing wrong with many of these older systems. Most people, the average person, is not a content creator. Most people use their phones for their basic communications. More people stuck on a phone trying to watch an itty bitty YouTube video with bad eyesight. But that's what they do. That's most people. So their computer at home is basically for spreadsheets, home expenses, budgets, documents that they create, basically a place to back up their pictures if they take the time to get them off their phone and onto their computer, and of course their sound library. Well, all of this can be done with a Linux system today. So going back to the ripping CDs, nobody's ripping CDs. Most people don't even know what a CD is hardly anymore. DVD ripping. I tried it years ago with a system that I thought was ultra powerful and for that day and age. And it was an overnight process that I swore to God I would never babysit through again. Today, most videos are hosted somewhere online. They can be purchased and downloaded much easier than being ripped. Almost everybody today, let me rephrase that. Almost everything today is done on the web. Email is on a web page. If you want to create text, documents, spreadsheets, those could be done online too. That is, if you want to share your thoughts with Apple AI, Google AI, or Microsoft AI. I was looking at Best Buy for the cheapest laptops just to see what they were going for, and they were in the $400 range. Desktop systems were about the same. If you read the specs on these $400 systems, they are essentially equivalent to Pentium 4 systems from 20 years ago. why throw what you have in the dumpster to buy a mainstream system that is essentially the same? If emailing, web surfing, video streaming, music listening, and document creating is all you do, Linux is perfect for your needs. Gaming and content creation is still a different beast. With the Steam app, you can play the games, but you might need to get a computer upgrade for some modern games, which defeats the purpose of changing your operating system. For music creators, you have some options, and these might be, you might be able to get by with these on the older operating systems just fine. For video creators though, you have fewer options, and that might prove to be a struggle on older systems, but it may not be impossible, but the struggle will be real. So look at your case scenario and what are you trying to do with the computer? If you're just wanting to make sure that you have a safe system that can't be hacked, but you don't use it all that much, feel free to try Linux. You'll have to do some learning. You can't jump from Windows to Mac OS without watching videos to learn. I've tried. It's learning a new beast, and same thing with jumping into Linux. You will have to watch other videos, and if you're looking for a specific answer, you will have to seek that out. I suggest going through this video with me. I'm going to show you with the Linux Mint and the Linux Debian install. The Debian, I show you how easy it is to screw that up. It's visually different. It's more techie, whereas Linux Mint is more straightforward for just the average user.